This is just film verification of what happened today. This is my air intake, this whole receiving box. I called a mechanic out who was supposed to be certified and registered. He came out, told me he was going to try and get it started, told me to get inside and try and start it. When he got ready, he went over here and he pulled the sensor off the intake. And then when he did that, after he did that, he took this stuff, professional brake cleaner, and he squirted this right in this sensor. First time he squirted it was about 3-second shot, good size shot. Tried to start it, it didn't start. Second time he squirted it for about 4 or 5 seconds, even bigger than the first one. Told me go ahead and try and start it again. Didn't start. He says, alright, try and give it gas and try and start it. And when I did, the whole thing blew up. Let me show you here. I'm trying to put this brake cleaner down. The brake cleaner was sitting up here. It blew off. Ended up over here, right outside the front of this trailer. He had to walk over there and stomp the flames out. And then over here, this whole air assembly, it doesn't attach anymore, and as you can see, the sides are just blown off and broken. It wasn't like that, and it was backfiring before he got here. I informed him of that before he got here and when he got here. Now, he said he could replace that part after he supposedly said just replace the plugs and it'll run right. Well, that wasn't what was wrong with it. But as you can see on the side of it, he also cracked, when it exploded like that, it cracked the whole assembly block, or air intake assembly box. The whole thing is cracked. There's a great big hole underneath this part. See the hole? I mean, it's all cracked apart. And I tried calling this guy, this supposed registered mechanic, and he hasn't returned my calls. I sent him an email telling him I requested he replace the parts. So far, he has not gotten back to me. This is video documentation thereof. He tried to say it could be replaced. This top piece could be replaced for $25. The lowest I saw it listed was used for $70. And then I still got to order it and pay shipping and handling. Either that or I got to go to you pull it. And nah, he blew it up. He needs to replace it. Anyway, be aware of this guy. If you get any work done from him, his particulars will be below this video. This guy is just, I don't know what his trip is, but I want him to replace this. He blew it up, he broke it, he needs to replace it. The problem was down underneath this thing, and had he pulled it off, which I told him the guy pulled it off, had he pulled it off, he would have seen the loose plug. And it was intermittently connecting. Anyway, when it exploded, it blew this off too, so I had to pull that off, loosen up the clamp, and remount it. And when I pulled it off, that's underneath here. I don't know if you can see it, but back underneath it here, in the back, there is there's a plug that goes on a sensor back there, and it's part of the ignition, and it was just loose. Anyway, that's what I'm sure it needed the plugs too, but he said he'd diagnose what was wrong with it. All I see him do is he blew up my fucking intake. Be careful of this guy. I'm still waiting to see if he's gonna fix it. This is a recap of what happened a few days ago. I have to try and repair it myself, so I'm going to film it with a different video, see if I can get a better picture of all this. Called out a mechanic. Car wasn't starting. And this mechanic came out, told me $70 and he'd diagnose what was wrong, guaranteed, and that he wouldn't leave me hanging with a bunch of codes, and he'd tell me what to fix, blah blah blah. Told him to come on out. Called to make sure I'd have enough money, and he showed up. He tried to have me start it, and it didn't start. So he took and pulled this out like that, this sensor. He pulled that out of the air intake, and then he took non-chlorinated brake cleaner and he stuck it in here. He gave about a 3, maybe a little longer, 3-second shot in there. Told me to try and start it, but don't give it no gas. So I tried and it didn't work. Then he said, okay, hold up, and shot it in there for about 5 or 6 seconds this time. Good long shot. And he's standing over here and he says, try it again. And it still didn't start. So he says, try it with gas. I stepped on the gas, tried to start it, and it exploded from all the fumes from this stuff, and it blew this off. And as you can see, this is completely broken off. These pieces broke off it. Okay. The whole rim is broken. It blew it completely off. And then on the receiving box, or the box itself, you can see here, there's a crack and a hole, and the crack runs all the way up to here. So the whole receiving box is cracked. I didn't notice that until after this guy left. Anyway, I told him he'd have to make a deal, because all he did after that is he pulled this spark plug and this spark plug, and he checked for compression. Said compression was good, and then checked this one to see if I was getting spark. Well, it started up when he was checking to see if it had spark, and he said, we'll change the spark plugs. Well, I changed the spark plugs, but that didn't solve the problem, and we'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, after that, he said that's all that was wrong with it, and wanted me to pay him $70. I told him, well, you broke this. And he pretended to make a call saying that he could get the part for $25, so he'd deduct $25 off the price. He got very insistent about it. Kept getting louder and louder. I didn't want to argue with anybody. I didn't want to fight with anybody. So I ended up paying him the $50. But then when I came out here to pull these pieces off and try and glue this back together, that's when I noticed the receiving box was actually cracked with a hole in it. Anyway, I've already emailed this guy at 2 of his email addresses. No response. I've called and left a message. No response. I called again and he had turned his phone off. He had blocked my number. So it's quite obvious he's not going to replace the parts that he broke. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure everybody knows that, you know, he's a dishonest, lying piece of doo-dah-day that basically will screw up your car if you call him, and I'd watch out for him. Anyway, be careful, people. His name is Alex Gonzalez. Mechanics to You, Performance Auto Works, all kinds of names. He has no physical address for his business. And also, I'd like to reinforce something. He used non-chlorinated brake cleaner when he squirted it in this hole for the sensor. Now mind you, I've used this starting fluid, numerous times, and this thing has been backfiring for at least 3 weeks. And I've used this in there numerous times, and it never did this. It never blew up like this. Of course, I didn't spray as much as this retard sprayed in mine with the brake cleaner. So, I mean, I can understand why it blew up, but anyway, just wanted to clarify that. Starting fluid never blew up. Brake cleaner blew the fuck up. Thanks. Alright. Here's a clarification on what was actually going on with the car. I changed the plugs and it still wouldn't start. Kept backfiring. When it did start, it would die again as soon as you accelerated, stepped on the accelerator, gave it any gas, it would die again. Well, what it was, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this plug back here. This wasn't pushed all the way in, and it kept wobbling around. That, and the whole engine kept flexing, so that increased it. And the negative terminal on the battery had to be replaced because when the engine flexed, it was semi-stripped and it would loosen up again. And that's why it kept dying off. That's probably also why it started when he had the plug disconnected and it wouldn't start before. Anyway, his diagnosis of changing the plugs, I'm sure it helped, but it wasn't the cause as to why the engine was screwing up, which is why I called him out here. He still charged me $50 and blew up my air intake. And as we can see, I'd like to clarify something here. I don't know if you can see it, but I didn't even mention it before. There's a hole, an actual hole blown out of this air intake box. Okay? That shows you how powerful this explosion was. I mean, you probably heard it for 2 or 3 blocks. It sounded like somebody set off a M102. Scared the shit out of him and blew that brake cleaner. The brake cleaner was sitting up here, and it blew that over here, and it started a little fire. He had to run over there and stomp that out and then come back and blow all the shit out that was still smoldering down here, wires and stuff. So be careful of this guy. This guy don't know shit, and what he does know, I don't know. I guess he ain't taking his knowledge to work with him.